primary reason behind these are strategic. This is to destroy their oil capacity, their industrialization, their war machine, their export income, and so on, because this war is being financed by oil and oil exports principally, and his economy is being in his war propped up by oil and oil exports. So the more of that can go on. There was another explosion in the boiler room of an oil tanker that it was in the Baltic. About to leave, and that I've got to believe. Although Ukraine, don't wait for Ukraine to claim credit for it. But this is clearly a sabotage act. It's crippled the oil tanker. It's a message.
I wanted to start off by getting your assessment of what we've seen in recent weeks and months, which appears to be a kind of increased assassination campaign by Ukraine against leading Russians. We saw the death of General Kirillov in Moscow in December, the killing of Armen Sargsyan, Putin's death squad chief, in Moscow as well, only last week. What message do you think that is designed to send to the Kremlin?
Well, Ukraine is outmanned and outgunned to a certain extent on the battlefront, but they're kind of holding their own despite all of that. Although there's a lot of signs of real problems on the Russian side, which is good. And they're, as I say, just holding their own is a victory when you think about it. The Trump's new presidency, of course, introduced a whole other level to the war situation. And, but along the way and continuing is pressure by Ukraine through special forces, which has been underway for about a year, to bomb inside Russia, not only with missiles and drones, but to do kinds of sabotage acts. So they've decimated the Navy, the Russian Navy in the Black Sea, which is really quite a triumph. They didn't even have a Navy. And the second thing is they've been really attacking the Russian refineries, the railways that bring things to the front, the oil storage facilities. And as we see, they have made some intermittent assassinations of high-profile individuals. And this is all designed to strike terror in the hearts of the Russians, who really have no say over the war, but it's not helpful for Putin to have an intimidated Russian populace that kind of knows he's not doing well.
That's really interesting. I mean, do you think it is designed more to intimidate people in Russia, people in Moscow who are seeing these explosions happening at apartment blocks where leading Russian generals are being killed? Or is it actually designed to strike fear into Putin himself? He may be thinking, well, more people close to me could be assassinated, or even that Putin himself could be assassinated.
Well, yeah, I think those are the fear among the people, and Putin are secondary effects. The primary reason behind these are strategic. This is to destroy their oil capacity, their industrialization, their war machine, their export income, and so on, because this war is being financed by oil and oil exports principally, and his economy is being in his war propped up by oil and oil exports. So the more of that can go on. There was another explosion in the boiler room of an oil tanker that it was in the Baltic. About to leave, and that I've got to believe. Although Ukraine, don't wait for Ukraine to claim credit for it. But this is clearly a sabotage act. It's crippled the oil tanker. It's a message.
And do all of these kind of assassination campaigns and some of the strikes on oil refineries, does this have General Budanov's fingerprints all over it? And if so, how important a figure has he become for Ukraine in recent years?
Well, I think that their military people are doing an amazing job with less to work with. I think that we're also going to find, as we're rounding toward a negotiation for a ceasefire, I really believe that's in the air. I think Trump is doing some very interesting, smart things, and Putin is responding appropriately. But as we move toward that, you're going to see that the seizure of part of Russia called Kursk is going to become a major bargaining chip for Ukraine. And they've continued to hold that. I mean, this is a chunk of Russian sovereign lands. And who would have thought? So they've been trying to push the Ukes out, and they can't. And so, it's a remarkable show of force by a country that is vastly outnumbered and outgunned.
And so if NATO membership for the medium term at least is off the table, if returning Ukraine to the pre-2014 borders is off the table, What about returning Ukraine to its pre-2022 borders? I mean, that would still require, presumably, increased military aid from the West to Ukraine. Is that realistic in your view, Diane?
I think it's tough. I think it's very tough. It's a stalemate now. And, it's unjust. It's wrong. It's immoral. But I'm not sure. If it can be done, if somebody sees a way it can be done, I would be 100% in favor of it. But it has to be Trump. He has to see that that's what's possible. So, but let's not preclude. Let's get him to stop shooting. Let's get them to the table, and then there may be a saw-off. In other words, halfway back, let him keep half of what he's taken, or whatever. Or the bargaining chips with Kursk. We'll give you Kursk, but we want those two newly annexed provinces. That's going to be the horse trading.
Just to bring you up to speed with what Pete Hegseth, the new defense secretary in the US, has been saying, because he's been speaking in the last hour or so as we're recording. He says America cannot promise to defend Europe from Russian aggression because it has to focus on its own borders and the threat of China. He said that the US would block any NATO involvement in the conflict or resolution. Pressure will instead fall on Britain and France to lead any peacekeeping force, which will have to be significant enough to defend against Russia should a deal crumble. I mean, how significant do you think today's intervention really is, Diane?
They're not going to put American boots on the ground. They've given virtually all of the military aid. The Europeans have done a good job giving humanitarian aid and taking care of refugees and all of that good stuff. But it's time for Europe. Europe is as rich as the United States, too. Let's not forget this. And they like to, Parisian cafes and beer stubes and football games and going to the pub and all that's just hunky-dory. But, they're the ones that are next in line, and they've got to pony up. And so I think Hegseth is just saying what I said, and that is NATO membership is not in the cards because that won't get him to stop shooting. That gives him a victory of sorts. But then when you get to the negotiating table, hopefully you push him back some more. There has to be a little give and take. And then, as I say, at the end of the day, it's the European troops that are going to have to be the peacekeepers in Ukraine.
What about some of the long-term challenges facing Vladimir Putin in Russia, however? Because a lot of people would say, look, if we could support Ukraine for the next year or so to continue its fight, then, the chickens are going to come home to roost when it comes to Vladimir Putin, because he's got an economy that is increasingly weak, with inflation going up and the ruble being very weak. He's got issues with energy as well, especially if Donald Trump ramps up domestic oil production in the US. He's now relying, according to South Korean sources, on North Korean construction workers to fill labour shortages in Russia. How much long-term difficulty do you think Putin's regime is in?
None. The only difficulty he faces is the Grim Reaper. He either dies or he's offed. And, this is a complete dictatorship. This is an old-fashioned czar, and he's untouchable. He's got everybody under his control. He's got enough money. As long as he has enough money for his secret police and his gulags and his military, he's okay. Now, once something happens to him, or he may decide to step down. I don't see that in the cards. But once he is removed from the equation, then all bets are off. And I think you see, and I've written about this many times, you'll see the division into many, many different independent countries of the Russian Federation, because it's not a Russian Federation. It's a federation run by Russians, white Slavic Russians in St. Petersburg and Moscow, but the rest of it are a bunch of ethnic groups that have been enslaved to them. So that will all spin off. And that is a very good thing as long as the nuclear arsenal is somehow protected from someone.
So you think Vladimir Putin is as secure in his post as he's ever been?
Yes, unfortunately.
And there's no chance of, because people didn't see necessarily Prigozhin and his attempted mutiny coming, there's no chance of something equivalent happening at some point in the next couple of years?
Oh, yes. I said he could be killed. He could be killed. Somebody could, in his inner circle, could do it, or Ukraine gets lucky with a drone. They're Lord knows they'd like to do that, because that changes everything.
So given what we've been hearing from Pete Hegseth today, given the general mood music that America is not prepared to fund Europe's defence in the way that it previously has, what more specifically would you like to see from the likes of the UK, France and Germany? Yes, of course, increasing defence budgets is part of it. But what else? Is there more military aid they could be providing to Ukraine right now ahead of peace talks to strengthen their hands? Or is there something else you'd like to see happen?
Well, the Americans are not backing off military aid. Remember that. The resource deal is actually the opposite. They get that resource deal signed and sealed, and it looks like it might be in the next week. You could see a flood of weapons. The other things the Americans what the Europeans could do is they could seize all those central bank Russian assets and give it to Ukraine for military and humanitarian aid. Just gift it, as well as put together an expeditionary force comprised of proportionately all of the NATO countries, or the European countries, and all of the EU countries, I would say, not all of whom are in NATO, led by, I would say, Britain and Poland, who are the moral forces, and Macron, if he retains power, who's a good guy. And you get those three, and they'll push the others in the right direction.
I just wonder, Diane, how likely you think it is that Donald Trump will actually be able to deliver some kind of peace this year. He has said, his team has said, he wants to achieve peace talks within the first 100 days. Is that realistic in your view, or do you think we're looking at a far longer time frame?
I think it's increasingly realistic, and I'm rooting for him. This has got to end. I mean, this is a horrific loss of life and of opportunity, and I think he might do it.
And do you think Putin I suppose it so depends on what the terms are, but a lot of the things that have been mooted so far, for example, this idea of a demilitarized zone between Russia and Ukraine that Keith Kellogg talked about, I mean, to me, that appears to be a complete non-starter if you're Vladimir Putin. So do you really think Putin is prepared to strike a deal with Trump at the moment?
I think he'd better be. I think he's facing a deal maker on the other side who is prepared to flood the world with oil and to drive down Putin's income, is prepared to strong-arm China and India into stopping buying it, is prepared to flood Ukraine with weapons if he's snubbed. And I think that these are the pressures building up that will allow. Now, a glimpse is today, the release of an American hostage. See, I'm not such a bad guy, says Vlad. I can be reasonable. And that's a big plus victory for Trump in this two-man contest, that he's willing to give up a hostage and under pressure from Trump. So I see movement, and I think it's a tragedy. It will always be, however it ends. Even pushed back to the 2014 border, it's a tragedy for Ukrainian people and for Ukrainian, and I would say for the world. But I think that something has to happen, and I think it's going to. At least that's my hope.
Diane, we always appreciate your insights and your analysis. Thank you so much for joining us again on Frontline.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.